Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Ryan Shelton. I am a functional medicine doctor working with my go-to doc. And today we want to discuss arthritis, joint pain, specifically where it pertains to long haul COVID. So, joint pain or arthritis is extremely common. It affects millions of people. And it could be your knees, it could be your hips, it could be your hands and fingers. It could be your elbows or shoulders. Joint pain is common. Surgery for joint pain is quite common. So, what I want to discuss today is how joint pain can become more prevalent post COVID, because it can become more prevalent post COVID. Perhaps you've never had joint pain in your life and you've experienced COVID. Now suddenly your fingers are stiff, your wrists are stiff, your knees are stiff, your ankles are stiff. That's common. And if you have pre-existing joint pain and you've had COVID, those joint pains can become worse. So we know that joint pain is a systemic problem that localizes into specific joints. Now, they tend to be joints that you overuse. So perhaps your knees, perhaps your fingers, perhaps your wrists, your shoulders. But if you've had COVID and your joint pain has increased, then you really want to listen. Let me open a document here. It's important that you understand that with joint pain post COVID, we need to hit it from multiple angles. We know the situation is inflammation, chronic inflammation that occurs because of certain proteins that are increased post COVID, due to pro inflammatory chemicals that are increased post COVID, and due to many factors that change the chemistry of the body. Fibrinogen increases, microclotting increases, and those pro inflammatory chemicals exacerbate pre existing joint conditions. So, again, it's a systemic problem that manifests locally. So, it's not enough to just put out the fire, right? We can take acetaminophen, we can take ibuprofen, but it's not enough just to put out the fire. It's not enough just to destroy the smoke alarm. We need to deal with the underlying inflammation, which causes so many problems post COVID. It can cause mood changes, it can cause neurological problems, it can cause ringing in the ears, it can cause terrible fatigue and brain fog. And if you have pre existing joint pain, it tends to get worse just because of all of the pro inflammatory chemicals that are produced by the body post COVID. So, at the end and at the beginning, we need to deal with inflammation, because it's inflammation that causes the pain. And people who experience joint pain are more likely to slow down or become more stationary. And this only aggravates, exacerbates the fatigue, the brain fog that's associated with long COVID. Because they assume that physical activity will only cause harm. And that's not true. As long as physical activity is moderate, as long as physical activity is to the point where it does not cause more pain, it actually relieves pain. So here I'm thinking about stretching, I'm thinking about Tai Chi and Qigong and yoga, where you're placing your body in physical therapeutic movements, but you're not feeling worse afterwards. So, physical activity with joint pain is very important, even though you may feel stiff, even though you may hurt. Physical therapeutic movement is very important with joint pain. Now, overdoing it, overusing your joints can cause more inflammation. I'm talking about the type of therapeutic movement that actually decreases joint pain. People who are just beginning to exercise after a long time away from a routine, or those using new techniques like CrossFit or Pilates, they might find their joints flare up and their joints are fighting them. So I encourage you to use exercise therapeutically so that after therapeutic movement, you feel better and not worse. So we know that the inflammation involved with COVID, involved with post-COVID, they can actually change the structure of the joints. They can start to deteriorate the cartilage and how the joints manifest with each other. They can cause weak muscles, which contributes to joint pain. Post-COVID patients have a pronounced increase in inflammatory chemicals, in pain chemicals. And to be clear, those are two different categories of chemicals. There are chemicals that your body produces which promote inflammation, which COVID can be responsible for, post-COVID can be responsible for. And there are also chemicals involved with pain, and those are two separate categories. Your cartilage and your joint structure can begin to deteriorate, and you may not experience pain. You may experience weak muscles, you may experience changes in the joint structure, but you may not yet experience pain. And the alarm signal, of course, begins when you start to experience pain, discomfort, stiffness, change in your range of motion, change in your ability to engage in daily activities. Now, we also know that post-COVID patients tend to suffer from hormone imbalances. We're talking about sex hormones like estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. We're also talking about adrenal hormones like cortisol and DHEA. And changes in those hormones tend to aggravate joint pain and exacerbate joint pain. Post-COVID patients they tend to suffer from lack of sleep or poor sleep. They have a difficulty time falling asleep, staying asleep. And again, that only aggravates the joint pain that exists in post-COVID patients. So we know it happens. We know that you get COVID, and if you have pre-existing joint pain, it gets worse. Perhaps you had a change in joint structure and those pain chemicals had not began flooding through the bloodstream. And so you didn't experience pain, even though you experienced change in joint structure. And now you have joint pain, new joint pain. Maybe it's your knees, your hands, your elbows, your shoulders, your hips. So what do we do about it? We have to control inflammation. Now, I'm going to talk about some things to control inflammation post-COVID, and I'm wide open to questions. So if you have questions, please ask, because that's what I'm here for. So it starts with diet. We want to make sure that we are eating a anti-inflammatory diet. So foods to avoid. Avoid processed foods, artificial foods, anything in a bag, in a sack, in a box. Try to avoid those. Try to eat whole foods. Try to make sure that you're utilizing your kitchen as much as possible. Chopping your foods, cooking your foods on the stove or in the oven. So avoid processed foods, avoid refined carbohydrates, sugary drinks, white flour baked goods. Those are all pro-inflammatory. Try to limit the intake of trans fats, saturated fats, fried foods, foods cooked at high temperatures. Try to eat a low sodium diet. We know that a high sodium diet contributes to inflammation. So here I'm talking about limiting your total sodium intake to 2,000 milligrams a day. And to be honest with you, most of our sodium intake is not through the salt shaker. It's not the salt that we add to food. It's the processing. It's the foods that are hamburgers and pizza and hot dogs. Those are loaded with sodium. So make sure that you're reading your labels. I'm okay with you adding a little seasoning salt to your foods. That's not where most of your sodium is coming from. It's the processed foods that you want to try to avoid. Certainly, avoiding processed foods means that you're also limiting additives and preservatives. I would also encourage that you consider looking at food allergies. Because if you're consuming foods that you're sensitive to, that you're allergic to, that is going to increase systemic inflammation, which will manifest locally in your joints. So the most common two food sensitivities or food allergies are gluten and dairy. Certainly limit or eliminate alcohol and nicotine products. Because inflammation is a physical reaction of the immune system as it attempts to fight off a foreign object. In our case, we're talking about COVID and the physiological changes that occur post-COVID. It makes sense that highly processed foods would trigger a pro-inflammatory response. So please, the first step that you can take is eliminating processed foods, making sure that you're eating whole foods. And I like to say, eat the rainbow. 5 colors each and every day. 9 servings would be the goal. So 9 servings, 5 colors each and every day. And if you do that, there's really no room for processed foods in your diet. So in addition to foods to avoid, excuse me, in addition to foods to avoid, you want to make sure to eat anti-inflammatory foods. So I just spoke of 9 servings of 5 colors. We get those anti-inflammatory chemicals, those proanthocyanidins, carotenes, the chemicals in nature that are naturally anti-inflammatory, the fruits, the vegetables, the beans, legumes, nuts, and seeds. And we want to make sure that we incorporate healthy fats. Now, healthy fats is an entirely separate topic for another day. But if you look at the chemistry of inflammation and of pain, the pro-inflammatory chemicals originate actually from a fatty acid called omega-6. If you consume more omega-3 fatty acids, your body produces anti-inflammatory chemicals. It's it's two different pathways. It has the same origin. You can either be pro-inflammatory with those omega-6 fatty acids or anti-inflammatory with omega-3, also omega-7 and omega-9 anti-inflammatory. So making sure that you're getting fatty fish, salmon is a great example, sardines and anchovies are a great example. Trout is a great example. Nuts and seeds are rich in omega-3 fatty acids. Of course, olives are rich in omega-9 fatty acids, avocado, coconut. So those are fats. Also make sure to include plenty of probiotics or fermented food in your diet. So those probiotics not only establish a healthy microbiome in the GI tract, in the gut, they can also assist you by producing anti-inflammatory chemicals. So making sure that you're taking a high quality probiotic each and every day or consuming fermented foods each and every day. Now, when we look at the studies across the board, when we look at thousands of studies on diet and joint pain, diet and arthritis, it's pretty clear that consuming more on the end of a vegetarian or even vegan diet is more beneficial than consuming meat, especially red meat. So try to avoid or eliminate, if you can, red meat. The protein sources, again, should be nuts and seeds, beans and legumes, fatty fish, the occasional poultry. A diet that's rich in fiber, whole grains, leafy greens like kale, spinach, chard, collard greens. We know that changes in joint structure can be reversed by a few nutrients, specific nutrients, beta carotene. So anything that's orange or red. Here we're talking about carrots and sweet potato, pumpkin, red bell peppers. We know that a diet rich in GAGs, I call them GAGs, glycosaminoglycans. So here we're talking about bone broth. If you enjoy soup, adding bone broth, and some people, frankly, just drink bone broth, rich in GAGs. There's a nutrient niacin, and I would recommend that you take it in the form of niacinamide. Niacinamide at the appropriate dose has been found in research to be effective not only to reduce joint pain, but actually to restore the structure of the joint, as well as tea, both green tea and black tea. We know that hydration is very important. Post-COVID, it is so important to help with brain fog, to help with fatigue, to help with sleep. But hydration is critical. Proper hydration is critical to help relieve joint pain. And many people just simply do not consume enough water. So I love niacinamide as a supplement for joint pain. I love boswellia. Boswellia is an herb from East India. It is, and research shows that it has been quite effective for treating joint pain. Cat's claw is another herb that can be effective specifically for the joints in the wrists and hand and fingers. Glucosamine chondroitin, that combination can be effective to help restore the joint and to help actually relieve joint pain. Some fantastic studies have been done on chondroitin glucosamine, specifically for knee pain, to be effective. However, it must be taken at the appropriate dose. If you're taking a low dose of chondroitin glucosamine, it will not work. But if you're taking it at a dose, my recommended and the research recommends glucosamine at 1,500 milligrams a day and chondroitin at 800 milligrams a day. And many supplements do not contain that dose. So it's very important that you look at the labels and understand the appropriate dose. Two more herbs that are fantastic for joint pain. Excuse me, I'm getting over a cold. Two more herbs that are fantastic for joint pain. They're not only fantastic for joint pain, but they can also help relieve some of the other manifestations of post-COVID. And those are turmeric and ginger. And when combined, turmeric and ginger act synergistically. They work together. So 1 + 1 equals more than 2. They actually work synergistically to provide enormous benefit, turmeric and ginger. And again, the doses of turmeric and ginger, they tend to be higher, the recommended doses, than most people take. So I would recommend at least 600 milligrams of ginger, at least 600 milligrams of turmeric. And another for joint pain is called M. That stands for methyl sulfonamyl methane, MSM. SAMe. The effect M, SAMe, is advantages 600 milligrams a day of MSM, and they're pretty costly. They're pretty pricey. So they are beneficial, but they can take a hit on your wallet for sure. And the last two herbs that I have found to be effective for joint pain are basil leaf. Again, you're not going to get this when you're cooking Italian food. It has to be 200 milligrams a day. And rosemary. Again, you're not going to get this with your rosemary chicken. We're talking about 200 milligrams a day of the rosemary. So niacinamide, turmeric, ginger, MSM, SAMe, basil, rosemary, glucosamine, chondroitin, SAMe, cat's claw, devil's claw, all of these can be effective for treating joint pain. But it is important that you take them at the appropriate dose. So that's my summary of joint pain post-COVID. Again, if you've never had joint pain in the past, you've had COVID and now you're experiencing stiffness in your joints, in your fingers, in your neck, in your back, in your knees, in your shoulders. That's common. And it's due to the systemic inflammation that's occurring post-COVID. And if you have pre-existing joint pain, an aggravation of that joint pain in severity is quite common as well. So I'm going to address a couple of questions that I see that have come in. Let's see. Please discuss back pain as it relates to general health. I always had back pain, but after COVID, can't seem to shake it. Will more exercise work? So back pain is certainly different than pain of the fingers or wrists or knees. Back pain is really improved by stretching, by therapeutic movements and stretching. So yoga is fantastic for joint pain. Stretching is fantastic for back pain. The muscles of the back for the most part, go parallel to the spine. And whatever vertebrae we're talking about, if it's up in the neck or in the mid-back thoracic area or down low in the lumbar area, when back pain occurs, the muscles that surround the spine tighten to try to protect the joint. They're actually trying to protect you. They're trying to protect the joint. And so one of the best things that you can do with back pain is stretching. Yoga is quite therapeutic for back pain, but there are other stretches that you can engage in as well. I noticed that my joints, especially in my hands, hurt really badly, and my DHEA levels are elevated per my recent labs a couple of weeks ago. So, DHEA is an adrenal hormone, and your adrenals pump out a few chemicals, mostly cortisol, DHEA, and in the interior of the adrenal glands, they also pump out epinephrine and norepinephrine. But for the most part, the majority of the hormones that come from the adrenal glands are cortisol and DHEA. So while no one wants elevated cortisol levels because that's an indicator of stress, cortisol is one of the body's most potent anti-inflammatory hormones. And so if the ratio of DHEA to cortisol is off, if your DHEA levels are high and your cortisol levels are low, then that can contribute to inflammation. Now, why would that ratio be off? If your DHEA levels are high and your cortisol levels are low, you may be suffering from something called adrenal fatigue. So chronic stress can lead to adrenal fatigue, and COVID can lead to adrenal fatigue, where that balance of cortisol and DHEA can change and opens up the floodgates to inflammation. Again, cortisol being a potent anti-inflammatory hormone. So what I would recommend for you would be an adrenal supplement that helps support the balance of cortisol to DHEA. And there are a number of supplements out there. Some of my favorite are cordyceps, which is a mushroom, eleutherococcus, which is an herb, ginseng can be quite effective. Schisandra can be quite effective. Again, it's an herb. There are a number of adrenal supportive herbs that have been used actually for thousands of years. And I would recommend that you consider taking an adrenal support herbal supplement to help balance out that cortisol DHEA ratio. Next question. Low dose naltrexone, would it help? I'm assuming that you're asking specifically for joint pain. Low dose naltrexone, I have not seen specifically helpful for joint pain. Low dose naltrexone can be helpful for some of the brain fog, some of the fatigue, some of the sleep disorders that occur post-COVID, but not specifically for joint pain. It's a great question. Let's see, next question. Some have said that lectins in nuts and seeds and whole grains are inflammatory and should be avoided. What are your thoughts on lectins? So I would say that there is a subset of the population that are sensitive to lectins. And there are functional medicine labs that can be run to detect, perhaps, if you're one of those individuals. You can always perform what's called an elimination challenge diet, where you completely, and I mean completely, eliminate sources of high lectins from your diet, and then basically challenge your body, eliminate for a week or 10 days, and then challenge your body with hefty doses of lectins, eating lots of nuts and seeds and beans and legumes for a day or two, and seeing if your physiology changes, seeing if your joint pain increases. That's my favorite. I like to use your body as the laboratory, because it's much more accurate. It's much more personalized and specific. So there is there certainly is a category, a subset of the population that are sensitive to lectins. I wouldn't say that that everyone is. I think the research shows it's around 20-25% of the population might be sensitive to lectins. If you are, then avoidance of lectins, very important. If you're not, then I see little reason to avoid foods that may contain lectins, because as you just listed, lectin foods, or foods that are high in lectins, nuts, seeds, beans, legumes, whole grains, besides gluten, they're quite healthy and quite beneficial and quite anti-inflammatory. So there is certainly a subset of the population that are sensitive to lectins, and my best advice is an elimination challenge diet to determine if you're one of those individuals. But there are also functional medicine laboratory tests that can be conducted to determine if you are one of those individuals. Good question. Yes, I know there are a couple of doctors out there that are they have heavy presence on social media, and they certainly adhere to the doctrine that lectins are problematic. And in my experience treating thousands of patients, and the research shows that yes, there is a subset that are sensitive to lectins, but I'm not really sure that applies to everyone. Even though there are a few health providers with prominent social media presence that say otherwise. All right. Any other questions today for me about joint pain post-COVID? I'm getting some here. A couple of questions. It may be from the same individual. A couple of questions. I'm not sure. It may be from the same individual. There have been questions about hair loss, which is totally off topic. Today is about joints. Yes, hair loss can increase post-COVID. That's actually quite common. It's strangely more common in hair loss post-COVID is actually strangely more common in females than it is males. Although it does occur in males, it's more common post-COVID in females. You realizing that when you're running your fingers through your hair, you're finding more and more loose strands in your fingers, or when you're brushing your hair, you're finding more loose strands in your comb or your brush. Yes, that is common. And again, it's due to the systemic inflammation that occurs post-COVID, interrupting the hair growth cycle of the hair follicles, unfortunately, encouraging more of the follicles to not stimulate growth. So hair grows in a cycle. Every hair follicle, it goes through a growth phase and through kind of a quiet phase where it doesn't grow. And inflammation encourages more of that quiet phase. In fact, if the quiet phase lasts too long, that hair follicle can basically go away and not be able to grow hair anymore. And so, yes, this inflammation, this systemic inflammation that occurs post COVID, affects multiple systems in the body. It affects your hormones, it affects your brain, it affects your nerves, it affects your skin, your GI tract, it affects your joints, certainly. Um, and along with the skin, it can affect hair growth as well. And so, um, there are increasing reports that people post COVID have hair loss, and it tends to be over the entire head. So it's not male pattern baldness that it encourages. It tends to be over the entire scalp, um, but it is common. Certainly, there are over-the-counter or prescription medications like minoxidil that can help with hair loss. But at its core, at its root, it's inflammation. And so going back to those botanical agents, excuse me just a moment. Going back to those botanical agents that I spoke about, can help to decrease inflammation systemically. So the turmeric, the ginger, the boswellia, the cat's claw, the devil's claw, all of those can boswellia, all of those can decrease inflammation systemically, and then you may need to apply something locally to encourage hair follicle stimulation. Let me see here. Other questions. Hi, what is your question on the thyroid? There's a question about thyroid. Not sure what that is. So post-COVID patients suffer from systemic hormonal imbalance. So changes in insulin, changes in adrenal hormones, certainly changes in thyroid hormones as well. The thyroid tends to go down. So we have hypo or low thyroid. And even without COVID, hypothyroidism is associated with joint pain. It tends to manifest with hypothyroidism. It tends to manifest in the knees, in the back, and the hands and fingers. And with the hormonal hypothyroid changes that occur post-COVID, that can be a contributing factor to the joint pain. And so with every post-COVID patient, I recommend doing some thorough functional medicine lab tests where we're looking at hormones and hormone imbalances, where we're looking at inflammation and inflammatory markers. We're looking at things like fibrinogen and clotting factors. So performing a full laboratory panel, I think, is essential. It's critical for each and every post-COVID patient to understand how we can best approach the patient, because many times it's inflammation, almost always it's inflammation. But COVID can also affect those hormone levels, and decreases, and in some cases increases, of hormones can greatly contribute to pain, to inflammation. And so getting our finger on the pulse of the hormones is very, very important. The endocrine system, the hormonal system, in my mind, it sort of works like an orchestra. They all work together. All of those hormones work together. And if you have, thinking of an orchestra, if you have a violin section that's off, the entire orchestra is going to sound terrible. If you have a percussion section that's off, the entire orchestra is going to sound terrible. And so a change or an alteration and an imbalance in one hormone cascades to the rest and can affect the rest. And it's not until we can make sure that all of the hormones are in balance that the orchestra actually sounds beautiful and your body is functioning optimally and well. So yes, it's very common for hormones to be disrupted post-COVID. Thyroid is one of the more common ones, certainly. So I would simply recommend that you see a functional medicine doctor and get a full panel of not just hormones, but get a full blood workup to make sure that we understand what's going on in you, because what's going on in you can be different than what's going on in the next person. So that we can get to the root cause and really treat the root cause. Inflammation's going to happen. So always thinking about anti-inflammatory methods and techniques is going to be essential. And if your hormones are imbalanced and disrupted, correcting them is going to be an essential part of your therapeutic care. Let's see. Next question. How long will post-COVID last, or is it permanent? Well, the answer to the first question is no one really knows how long it lasts. In some individuals, it doesn't occur. In some individuals, it lasts a few weeks. In some individuals, it lasts a few months. And, we're 2003 here. We're 3 years out. And some people who were infected by COVID or who have post-vaccine injury back in 2020, so 3 years ago, some individuals are still suffering from post-COVID symptoms, and they're still struggling with brain fog and joint pain and fatigue and sleep disorders, and the list goes on 3 years out. Is it permanent? No, it's not permanent. Working with the providers of My Go-To Doc, we have demonstrated that we can greatly improve the symptoms of post-COVID, if not completely resolve them. So there is hope, and I think that's the most important word to visualize is hope. There is hope that things can and they will get better with proper therapeutic treatment. But the duration of post-COVID is just variable from one person to the next. Let's see. Next question. You mentioned how COVID can cause adrenal issues, but some of the natural remedies to balance adrenals seem to be contraindicating for thyroid issues. I would have to know specifically what you're speaking about. There are some herbal remedies that are contraindicated for thyroid issues if you have hyper or hypothyroid issues. And there are also some herbs that benefit both the adrenals and the thyroid. Kind of the star that I'm thinking of here is ashwagandha. We know that ashwagandha can help balance and support the adrenal glands, and we also know that it can help support the thyroid gland. So it just depends really on the treatment that we're considering. But ashwagandha is a fantastic example for both the adrenals and the thyroid. I missed a question about flaxseed. Let's see. I had a doctor recommend that I take flaxseed oil for my inflammation in my joints, but I see this also contains omega-6 and omega-9, which I thought were anti-inflammatory. What are your thoughts on this? Okay, so here's the situation with vegetarian omega-3 oils. If it's flaxseed or chia seed or hemp seed or whatever. They're not complete. Now, what do I mean by that? A vegetarian source, say from a nut or seed or whatever, a vegetarian source of omega-3 will contain a combination of other omega oils, omega-7, omega-9, omega-6. Also, it's not complete, meaning that if you take flaxseed oil, it's inactive. The form of omega-3 is inactive. Your body can't use it. Your body has one enzymatic step. It has one step to change it into an active anti-inflammatory form of omega-3. Now, truth be told, about 20% of individuals lack that enzyme. They lack that enzyme to change the inactive form of omega-3 found in flaxseed oil into the active form that's beneficial for the body. Most people have it. Some people don't. So not only do vegetarian sources contain multiple fatty acids like omega-6, omega-9, omega-7, but it also contains an inactive form of omega-3. And some people can't change it into the active form of omega-3. So unless you're a strict vegetarian or vegan, I always recommend that you take a fish source of omega-3 fatty acid. There are a few companies out there that are fantastic. They refine it just to the omega-3 fatty acids, so there's no other omegas there. It's an active form, and they also make sure that it's pure and potent. By pure and potent, I mean that I'm sure many of you have heard that there's an issue with heavy metals in fish, specifically mercury, but there can be others. And they refine it in a way that ensures that there is 0.000% of mercury in the end product. So not only are you getting the pure active form of omega-3, you're also not getting any of the other omegas. So ultimately, the answer to your question is yes, flaxseed does contain both omega-3 and omega-6. It contains a much higher amount of omega-3, but it does contain some omega-6. All right, I need to wrap up here in a minute. Any other last minute questions that you all have for me? Thank you for joining me. I like the topic of arthritis. It doesn't get talked about a lot for post-COVID. We talk a lot about respiratory issues post-COVID, and immune issues post-COVID, the brain fog, the fatigue, the sleep disorders, tinnitus or ringing in the ears, paresthesias or numbness and tingling in the hands and feet. We talk a lot about those other symptoms of post-COVID, but I think it's important to point out that new joint pain can come about post-COVID, and pre-existing joint pain can certainly be aggravated post-COVID. All right, one more question. Let's see. Getting this? Oh, there are several more questions. Sorry. I have been told I have arthritis in my neck showing from x-rays. I don't have any pain at all. Any way to reverse it? Yes, so arthritis can occur. And going back to the very beginning, inflammatory chemicals are different than pain chemicals. Those are two different categories of chemicals that your body produces. And so, yes, you can existing arthritis. You can have damage to joint tissue, changes in joint structure without actually experiencing pain. And that can be revealed upon x-ray, and you may not experience pain at all because those categories of chemicals that your body produces are quite different. There's inflammatory chemicals, which occur with inflammation and arthritis, and then there's pain chemicals that are a separate category. And some individuals have arthritis and may not experience pain at all. Another question is morning basal low temperature an indicator of hyperthyroidism, and how low? I think you mean hypo. So hypothyroidism is low thyroid. I certainly wouldn't expect basal body temperature to be low with hyperthyroid. Low basal body temperature in the morning can be a diagnostic indicator of hypothyroidism. And depending on how you take your temperature, 93.1, that's quite low. I'm not sure how you're taking your temperature. I'm not sure you would be living if your core body temperature was 93.1. So it all depends on your methodology of how you're taking your temperature. But yes, hypothyroidism can be associated with low morning basal body temperature. Is krill oil better than omega-3 fish oil? Better. That's a tough word. So omega-3 is omega-3. Most companies derive it from sardines and anchovies, the omega-3. Some companies derive it from krill oil. If it's not a refined oil and it's the whole krill oil, they may have some added benefits than just the omega-3, because there are compounds in krill oil beyond omega-3 that can be beneficial. The omega-3 from krill, from a couple of research articles that I've seen, seems to be more bioavailable. So it seems to be absorbed more effectively than some of the other omega-3 oils. So is it better? Is it worse? Ultimately, omega-3 is omega-3. It comes down to the dose, ultimately. One of the doctors that I work with, they call fish oil and krill oil happy juice, because it does affect your mood. It increases and improves mood. And krill oil can do that. Omega-3 fish oil can do that. The bottom line is making sure that you're taking the appropriate dose and making sure that it's pure, that it's free from heavy metals. But I love krill oil. I really like omega-3 fish oil. Just make sure that the company that you're using is pure and potent. I got a couple more questions here. Is red light therapy or sauna helpful? Yes. I mean, the short answer is yes, absolutely. If you have access to red light therapy or sauna, please utilize that. It can be helpful. Are probiotics helpful? Yes, I spoke about this earlier. Probiotics not only reestablish a healthy microbiome for the gut and improve digestion, but establishing a healthy microbiome can be quite anti-inflammatory. Probiotic you can get through fermented food. If you're taking it as a supplement, if you're taking it daily, I would recommend maybe 25 to 50 billion organisms each and every day. So most people underdose, but 25 to 50 billion organisms a day, multi-strain. So not just Lactobacillus aedophilus, but multi-strain. I have rheumatoid arthritis. If the hands have disfigured, can it go back to normal? Not likely. Not likely. Those are structural changes that are very difficult to reverse because of the chronic inflammation that's occurred. What is a good amount of fish oil per day? It depends on what condition. If we're talking specifically about joint pain, I would recommend at least 1,000 milligrams, but you can go anywhere from 1,000 to 5,000 milligrams per day. And the more you take, the more effective it's going to be. But a minimum dose would be 1,000 milligrams per day of the omega-3 fatty acid fish oil. All right, I think I've ran out of time. So one more question, and then I've got to go. Is taking digestive enzymes every day beneficial or harmful? Can it cause your body to start producing less of its own enzymes? No, taking a digestive enzyme every day is beneficial, not harmful. It's not going to change your body's capacity to produce its own enzymes. Turmeric with 95% curcuminoids, better for inflammation too, or just cancer? No, inflammation as well. Definitely inflammation. So 95% curcuminoids, you're looking at, again, a minimum dose of 500 to 600 milligrams a day on that. All right, thank you all for joining me today. I enjoyed doing this. Tune in next week, same time, same place. We'll tackle another topic about post-COVID. So I enjoy doing this. We're all on a journey together. I'm here to serve and help you, and you're here to help educate me about your needs. So I always enjoy it. Thank you very much for your time, and see you next week.